Selfish sister scheduled her baby shower on my wedding day, expecting support, but karma struck as family chose my wedding over hers. I've come here to vent because I'm angry about the incident that happened a few days ago. The fact that my older sister, Porsche, 30F, has a lot of main character energy irritates me in every manner, since I've never been one to start arguments or drama. This has been the standard in both her and my lives, and I've usually never voiced my objections or said anything. But when she chose to throw her fourth child's baby shower on the same day as my wedding, it all came to a head. Naturally, I was devastated to learn of it just a few days prior to the wedding. I knew this small coincidence, as she described it, was intentional on her part because I had forced my family to RSVP to the wedding date months in advance. All it did was make me want to tear out her hair or mine. Since my family has always done things that way, I had a persistent suspicion that they would choose to attend her baby shower rather than my wedding. For as long as I can remember, she has always been the golden child, and I have always been the afterthought. I had hoped that this day would be about me, but I knew she was going to steal even this day from me because of her baby shower. I don't have the finest relationship with Porsche, 25F. I would largely blame Porsche's attitude and haughtiness, but I would also credit my parents' upbringing. In school, Porsche was an overachiever. She participated in sports, excelled academically, and was well liked by her peers and instructors. Her parents were quite proud of her. That being said, I was only mediocre. Academically, I wasn't very good, but I wasn't awful either. My parents said that I had no relevant hobbies. And the fact that I attended the same school as my sister only made this worse, because I was so different from Porsche, not just in attitude but also in abilities. All of my teachers, including the principal, used to be pretty shocked that we were sisters. We were compared all the time. And I was never good enough. My parents were not pleased with my lack of abilities. My favorite kid was Porsche because she was a bright child. She was treated, pampered, and had everything done for her. As a child, I was informed unequivocally that if I became as good as Porsche, my parents would treat me the same way. Because of my early years, I have a number of psychological problems with self-worth, which have negatively affected my quality of life. I knew by the time I was 13 that I would never be able to have a healthy and productive relationship with my family. I simply stopped interacting with the family after accepting that as my reality. I stayed in my room, largely kept to myself, and drew for hours on end. No one ever took it seriously, and it was the only true pastime I had. In a sense, I was the extra family member, always an afterthought, never left alone, and always viewed with disdain because I was not good enough for my parents, because I was too preoccupied scribbling to work hard and be a source of pride for the family like my sister. My mother even tore one of my sketch pads, calling me a scribbler. At that moment, I realized that no matter what I accomplished, they would only regard me as a smaller version of Porsche and that I would never be able to compete with her, even if I tried, and I didn't want to. I simply ceased communicating with them as much as possible. Porsche changed when she went off to college when I was 13. She had changed from being the good girl our parents had brought up. Without a doubt, she continued to do well. But she wasted money like crazy, refused to return home, and never answered their calls. My parents, I suppose, were affected by all of this and felt secluded and alone. After being parents to a single child for 18 years, the child suddenly showed little interest in them. That's when they started looking at me. They made an effort to bond with me and become closer, but I didn't want anything to do with it. I had been accustomed to being alone myself, so all of this attention only made me feel anxious. My parents wanted to play happy families, so I wasn't going to change the long period it had taken me to learn how to live alone. This infuriated them. And my situation worsened. They were always insulting me or yelling at me, and I could no longer stand it. Before attending college, I somehow made it through the following several years. Since then, I haven't had much communication with them. I can say that all of that doodling paid off because I have a degree in animation. I'm doing well for myself and got a decent job right out of college. I feel even more smug about the whole situation because this is not what anyone, especially my sister and parents, anticipated of me. Over the past 2 to 3 years, they have made numerous attempts to contact me in an attempt to become closer to me and other such things, but I have consistently, graciously turned them down. I am more than content with the small family I have created for myself and no longer feel the need for them in my life. I reside with our adorable dog, Emma, and my fiancé, Edward, 29M. I don't want them to interfere with my wonderful life, friends, or social circle. Before I started working, Porsche got married a few years ago. I was obviously not invited. This is also one of the reasons I don't think their efforts to get back in touch are very sincere. When I was just a student, they didn't give a damn about me, but now that I'm successful, they're trying to be family and make amends. I am not one to be duped by their evil mask, and I can see right through it. I suspect that they are merely trying to reconnect with me in order to take advantage of me. She got pregnant immediately after graduating from college, had a shotgun wedding, and has never received a dime since. Because Porsche doesn't work, the family had always assumed that, since she was the smart one, she would be the one making the money, and that I would fail. They are attempting to patch things up so that I can be their cash cow now that there is no chance of her giving them any money. Since the day I was born, my parents have been like this. My extended family has improved significantly throughout my childhood. My Aunt Rachel, who has constantly criticized my parents for their partiality, was like a mother figure to me. Naturally, these accusations were strongly refuted, but over time, the entire extended family learned the truth. They have encouraged me to maintain minimal communication, and no one has put much pressure on me to mend fences with my relatives. Up until around 3 months ago, my mother experienced a pretty significant health crisis. The diagnosis was difficult, and she spent weeks in the hospital. Since then, her quality of life has suffered greatly, and the doctors have stated that it will take a long time for her to get back to her previous state, if she ever does. My aunt claims that this served as a wake-up call for my mother. She cried for me, her baby, the whole time she was in the hospital. Since we had little to no communication for a few years, I wasn't informed about her health problems right away. However, a week after the incident, my aunt called to inform me that my mother was very ill and had come to the understanding that she had not treated me well. My mother has been crying nonstop since that day, pleading with me to contact her again because she knows she will die soon and doesn't want that to happen before I give her another chance to be a decent mother. I had struggled with this because I knew in my heart that my mother's desire to make amends stemmed solely from her need to avoid taking the blame for mistreating her own kid. It had less to do with me and more to do with her remorse. However, I was also aware that I would regret not speaking with her or, at the very least, getting in touch with her again. So after giving it some serious thinking and receiving a lot of encouragement from my aunt and my fiancé, I made the decision to try it again and contact her. For us, it was emotional. She shed many tears and apologized profusely, but I simply told her to forget it, and that I no longer wanted to discuss or interact with her about it. My father and I didn't speak for more than a few words, since he wanted to be polite and is too proud to own his mistakes. During this brief reunion, Porsche was not present, and I later learned that this was at our mother's wish. During our conversation, Mom had strongly disputed Porsche's presence, and I've heard she was really upset about it, but she was unable to stop it. And now for the real thing. After the first few meetings, I must admit that I did not have much time for my mother because I was so busy with all of my wedding preparations. I could have, but I also wanted some leisure and was too stressed out from the heavy workload. Even after our alleged reconciliation, my parents were angry that I had not included them in the wedding planning process, or assigned them any of the customary responsibilities that the bride's parents are expected to fulfill. Even though my mother was unhappy about the whole thing, she decided to ignore it, which is when I started to think that perhaps she was truly sorry. In contrast, my father was furious that he would not be the one to accompany me down the aisle. He even gave me a call to let me know that I was making him look like a bad father in front of everyone, so he was thinking of skipping the wedding. I informed him that nothing had returned to normal, particularly between us, even after everything. He was also allowed to do anything he chose, which included not knowing if he thought this was too offensive. That immediately silenced him, and he remained silent thereafter. I didn't communicate with her at all during this period. Regarding Porsche, she indicated that she would be attending, and I had just sent out the invitations. I reasoned that there was nothing else to discuss with her, but I was going to have a big surprise. My cousin Lena called me in a panic 2 weeks prior to my wedding. She told me that she was speaking with Porsche and that Porsche had asked her to attend her baby's shower in the same city on the same day as my wedding at a location she had reserved an hour away. It seems that she was phoning folks to the baby's shower without really sending out invitations because she was afraid I might hear about it. Lena said that she was positive, and that some other family members had already received the invitation when I asked her whether she was certain about it, and if she might have been wrong. Additionally, she was allegedly making a big deal out of it, claiming that she wanted everyone to come because this was her and her husband's last child and that it mattered even more to her. I was incensed when I learned. I questioned her whether this was real over the phone right away. She claimed that she believed it was the greatest way to incorporate our enjoyment because she knew she wouldn't be able to bring the whole family together until after my wedding. I should be happy that her baby gets to celebrate and attend my wedding in spirit, she stated. Since she did it on my wedding day, not even a day before or after. I told her that she was insane and a spiteful witch. I also reminded her that she should have inquired or notified me if she truly had good intentions. Just 2 days before my wedding, I was learning about it from someone else, which revealed to me what she was planning to do and how insane she was. She informed me that she was free to celebrate her baby whenever she pleased, that I had no right to call her names, and that I had no control over the date or what other people chose to do. She asserted that I had no authority to prevent guests from attending her baby shower or traveling to my wedding if they so desired. I hate to confess it, but I had a full-blown mental breakdown and was completely at a loss for words. I simply couldn't handle the facts and was inconsolable. Even though he was angry, Edward, who was with me, knew just what to say. We made the decision that everyone we had invited would receive a note. We made an effort to appear as kind as we could, and the message said something like how we discovered that the dates had conflicted. Although we were pleased for Porsche, we were aware that some of our guests would have to choose between going to the baby's shower and the wedding. Additionally, we informed them that we were not in the mood for any more drama with only 2 weeks left until the wedding and asked them to confirm their attendance with my maid of honor. The wedding is where I would see them. I instructed my maid of honor to record everyone who confirmed their attendance so that we could modify the catering and other arrangements appropriately. We would simply go to the courts and be married if everyone decided to come to the baby shower. Although it may seem like an exaggeration, I was certain that most people would prefer to attend her baby shower over my wedding because I had been ignored my entire childhood. I'm happy I was shown to be mistaken. I asked Zara, my maid of honor, 2 days prior to my wedding if anyone had confirmed what the current situation was. She simply assured me that everything was under control and that I shouldn't worry about it. I still didn't know how. Many people had left me for Porsche, so her response was not at all reassuring. She simply told me to relax and that she would handle everything. I was shocked to see nearly every member of my family who I had invited on the wedding day, with the exception of Porsche, of course, my father, who I had presumed, and my paternal aunt and her family. My mother, who is not the kind to do things without my father, was one of the people who made it, which surprised me greatly. The actual wedding proceeded according to plan, and I must admit that I was relieved my father wasn't attending. He would have created needless drama and pouted the entire time. I was therefore rather relieved that he was not there. Porsche, however, was unable to tolerate this affront against her, especially since she was not accustomed to it. I noticed Dad and Porsche arriving at the location as my ceremony was nearing to a conclusion and everyone was leaving for lunch. Zara stood up and prevented them from entering the building before I could say anything. Even though I couldn't fully understand what they were saying, I could tell that they were arguing and that the argument was becoming more heated by the moment. Porsche even attempted to force her way inside at one point, and Zara did her best to keep her out, but my dad also forced through. And their combined might was too great for her. She burst into tears like a pampered child the moment Porsche entered. It was real crying like a baby, not just a few stray tears here and there. Seeing it was so repulsive and unpleasant, I was embarrassed because she was acting in such a way in front of Edward's family, our friends, and our coworkers. Even though I knew my family was aware of her shenanigans, she insisted that I should have had the grace to postpone my wedding when I knew she was throwing her baby shower, and that everyone had come to my wedding rather than her final one. Before I could respond, Rachel claimed that she was the one who had stolen the wedding date, which I had decided upon months prior. She would have been the one to move her baby's shower to a different day if she had any common sense. Portia glanced at my dad for support because she didn't anticipate being called out in that manner, but he was strangely silent at that point. Portia boldly asserted that, although marriages fail frequently and that I might marry again, she was definitely not going to become pregnant again. I wanted to slap her in the face because I was so angry at the time. I was shocked that she had the audacity to imply that my marriage might fail on my wedding day. By that point, I'd had enough and told her to leave the stadium immediately. I also informed her that she already had 3 children and that, given everything she has done since leaving college and spending all of Dad's money, there was no assurance she wouldn't continue to pop out. I interrupted her as she began to yell, telling her that she was a terrible person who only ever considered herself. I told her that I felt bad for her children since they had such a bad mother. She quickly stopped talking after that and began crying once more, but I couldn't stand it. She was physically hauled out of the venue by Zara and another friend of mine. She had destroyed my day, and by the time it was all over, I was crying and shivering. Nearly everyone ended their lunch early and left because of the uncomfortable environment. The thing that wounded me the most was that my mother never spoke up for me or informed me of Portia's plans during all of this time. Therefore, in my opinion, her reconciliation was a phony act because, even though she had the opportunity, she still failed to treat me fairly. Edward pulled me close and assured me that it wasn't my fault at all and that I would eventually hit my breaking point. I sobbed, hugged him, and apologized for spoiling the day. After everyone had left, people have been contacting me for the past 5 days since our wedding, but I am not in the right frame of mind to reply. I know I will ultimately have to reply to all of the messages that are currently sitting in my inbox, but I don't want to do that right now. Tomorrow, we're heading out on our honeymoon, so I'm hoping I can get better and forget about whatever occurred. I can't let my disgusting sister spoil my honeymoon any more than she did my wedding, which I was unable to stop. Even after all these years, she still has no power to influence me in this way. Update 1. Hello Reddit. During my honeymoon, I took a vacation from Reddit, which is why I haven't been updating. When I saw all of the comments, I was overwhelmed since I hadn't anticipated the post to become so popular, but I read them all. Here's a quick update because you're suddenly so interested in the narrative. Ed and I didn't really consider any kind of communication with my side of the family on our honeymoon. Despite my mother's repeated attempts to contact me, I just informed her that I will speak with her after returning from my honeymoon. Since then, she has called to apologize for not standing up for me at the wedding and to express her remorse, saying she wants to meet with me. She knew about the baby shower but chose not to tell me, so I explained that this was about more than simply the wedding. She said she hoped people would attend my wedding over the baby shower anyhow and didn't want me to be sad. I informed her that she had once again demonstrated her unreliability, particularly with regard to my sentiments and emotions, and that her presumptions did not justify what she had done to me. She apologized again, but I urged her to stop contacting me and that I needed some time apart from her. I told her that she had chosen to re-enter my life in order to show me that she was sorry, even though she attempted to use the "I'm sick" excuse. Her actions, however, have demonstrated the opposite to me, as she still chooses Porsche before me, even if it means ruining one of the most significant days of my life. I felt terrible for tearing into her, as she was sobbing uncontrollably, but I knew I couldn't allow her to run all over me once more. I couldn't let her return with her similar antics and ruin everything, because it had taken me years and years to feel mentally safe. I informed her that although I would be contacting her, I would do it at my own pace and that I did not want her to put any pressure on me to start dating her, because it was obvious that she was not ready. I believe she thought she could use victimization to get me to give in, but when that didn't work, she handed the phone to Dad, whom I had no desire to speak to. I hung up the phone as soon as I heard him on the line. When that, I blocked him. When he wrote me a lengthy text that I didn't even bother to read, other than that, I only received texts from family members expressing their regret that Porsche had attempted to overshadow me at my own wedding and essentially offering their support and sympathy. Even if I haven't answered them all, I will. Overall, the whole experience has made me feel a lot better, and I'm happy that I've broken off contact with my mother once more. I don't want my parents to destroy the family I've created for myself, and I don't have the energy to cope with them. Update 2. It's obvious that the drama is still going on, even though I had assumed it had ended. Jake, the spouse of Porsche, showed up at my house last night. I called him inside because he appeared rather forlorn, and I didn't have the courage to turn him away. He apologized to me right away, claiming he was unaware Porsche had been plotting this. That's when I remembered that I didn't see Jake at my wedding for the entire episode. When I asked him what he meant, he explained that she had demanded that the date be changed because he had really scheduled Porsche's baby shower for a week after my wedding. She also explained to him that she wanted to hold the baby shower on the same day as the wedding because I hadn't invited them. He disagreed, saying that since we had been apart for a while, she shouldn't have been anticipating an invitation in the first place. He claimed that he would have been shocked if I had invited them, and that he never tried to get clarification from me since he thought it was reasonable that I hadn't. He was embarrassed to learn the truth about what had truly transpired that day, and he only learned it because my mother informed him. He inquired if there was anything he could do to improve the situation overall, and expressed his sincere regret, saying he wanted to apologize on her behalf. I informed him that his wife was an adult who was capable of accepting responsibility for her own conduct, and that he had no need to apologize because he was not present. I told her that if she didn't apologize, it didn't mean anything, and that she needed to learn to accept responsibility for her actions. I thanked him for getting in touch and assured him that I had nothing against him, and that he seemed like a wonderful man. Although I think it was kind of him to visit and speak with us, his wife's actions still stand. To be honest, I am aware that I will not forgive her even if she were to apologize in the future. Now that she has dug her grave, she can rest in it. Update 3. Jake and Porsche are on the verge of getting a divorce. It seems that they had been at odds for a while, and her actions at my wedding were the final straw. She has been running around accusing me of being the cause of her divorce. But I suppose that everyone has had enough of her shenanigans and is no longer prepared to put up with her self-pitying rant. It had been made clear that this would only be a temporary arrangement, but the last I heard, she was going to move in with Mom and Dad. She even contacted me to offer to watch her children for free, claiming that this would be my way of making amends for destroying her life. I don't want to get involved in this drama any longer, so I immediately blocked her everywhere. Although I am unaware of the specifics of their divorce, I am aware that Jake is attempting to obtain sole custody of all the children because he believes she gives them an unsuitable and unstable environment in which to grow up. Although I am unsure of the outcome of their divorce, I am aware that she is in tremendous difficulties, and that no one is currently prepared to assist her, so it's unclear what will happen. I've completely bowed out of this whole mess, and consequently my family. That's all I know. I lived a quiet and contented existence before they made the decision to contact me again, and this is far more bother than they're worth. My Aunt Rachel and a couple of my cousins are the only members of my family who I currently choose to be around, because they were there for me during the whole wedding disaster. I have the utmost gratitude for their unwavering support. I'm going to be extremely protective of my boundaries going forward since they are the only people who deserve to be in my life. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you. After my family took over my house and tried to push me out of my own room, I kicked them all out. I am a 26-year-old who lives with my parents in a home that I fully pay for. Although it sounds rather simple, it's much more intricate than that. I'll begin at the beginning. Last year, I purchased a home in the city. I pay for everything, including food, all of the bills and the entire mortgage. Not a single penny is paid by my parents, Liz, 55F, and Tom, 55M, who are both retired teachers, nor was it a case of moving back home because I couldn't afford rent. As a software developer, I actually earn a nice living, and I wanted to be nearer to employment options in the city. In addition, I felt that after they had supported me for years, it would be good to return the favor. It's a pleasant 3-bedroom home with a large living room and a backyard. It's nothing fancy, but comfortable. I claim the master bedroom because I pay for everything. It has its own bathroom and a walk-in closet, which is a big plus because I detest having to share a bathroom. Since I spent around 80% of my time working from home, I set up my home office in the second bedroom with 2 monitors, a comfortable chair, and all the supplies I need. For family visits, the third bedroom was kept as a guest room. Everything was wonderful at first. While I worked and took care of the house, my parents, who were glad to be in the city, went about their own business. Since they were my parents and I felt good about supporting them after everything they had done for me, I didn't mind paying the bills. Then, however, a change occurred. My mother casually dropped a bombshell during breakfast one morning. My older brother, Jake, 28M, and his wife, Emma, 26F, were considering relocating to the city. She said they have reportedly been having difficulties, and Emma is pregnant. They really need the help, she added. At first, I didn't give it much thought. I thought that if Jake and Emma relocated, they would find a tiny apartment close by. But they have a history of jumping from one horrible circumstance to another. Things took a turn for which I was unprepared at that point. A few days later, my mother sat me down and, in her most innocent voice, informed me that Jake and Emma had been invited to remain with us, albeit only temporarily, until they were able to get back on their feet. They didn't ask if I was comfortable with this, though. Oh no, they informed me after inviting them. Jake and Emma arrived with their luggage in hand, obviously intending to remain for the duration, while I was still processing the entire situation. The deal is this: as soon as Jake and Emma moved in, it was obvious they had no intention of leaving. I'm already anxious about the additional costs I'll have to pay now that I have 2 more people to support. Without anyone asking how I feel, I'm paying for everything: groceries, utilities, the mortgage, etc. Although I like my brother, Jake isn't the most responsible person. He always gets himself in a predicament where everyone else has to save him. Emma seems decent enough, but I don't like her entitled attitude, which makes me feel like everyone should take care of her because she's expecting. Almost instantly, the tension began to rise. Emma began making these innocuous-sounding remarks a few days after they moved home, but they are really, really bothersome. For example, "This place is so big, it must be hard for you to clean it all by yourself." Or, "When the baby stuff arrives, we're going to need a lot of space." At first, I didn't give it much thought. However, things became more heated. One evening, Emma and Jake drew me away and said they needed a conversation. I hoped they would give financial assistance or perhaps apologize for the additional strain they were placing on me. However, "No, so we've been thinking it would make more sense if we took the master bedroom," explains Emma in a relaxed tone. Jake interrupted. "Yeah, the baby's going to need a lot of stuff, and your room has the walk-in closet and private bathroom." I blinked, thinking I could have misheard. Let me remind you, These two were sitting here recommending that I give up my own room for them and their unborn child, even though I pay the mortgage and everything else. I was suddenly struck with boldness. I said, "Why don't you just take the guest room?" while maintaining my composure. "It's quite large." Emma looked at me as if I had just made a ridiculous suggestion. "There isn't a walk-in closet in that room," she stated. "The infant will require room." I was finished. I refused to give up my room. "You can either locate another place to stay or use the guest room." Jake was somewhat taken aback, as if he was surprised that I wasn't simply giving in. However, Emma was blatantly insulted. I realized then that things weren't going to work out. Things quickly started to go south. I observed Jake and Emma become quite at ease over the course of the following few days. Their belongings were all over the place, with baby magazines strewn on the dining table and shoes kicked off by the couch. Emma even began discussing the crib's location as if she had already made up her mind that they would remain in the master bedroom. I had to attend a meeting in the office one day. For the remainder of the night, the house was strangely quiet. Nobody tried to quarrel with me or knock on my door. They must have realized at last that I was no longer playing around. They didn't deserve to reside in my home if they didn't respect me. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. First update. I was hoping for a dramatic outburst or for everyone to finally take me seriously once I handed out the eviction papers. Rather, there was an uncomfortable silence in the home. Due in part to my inability to fall asleep, I woke up earlier than usual the following morning. I was waiting for a certain event. Perhaps my parents would try to persuade me or might knock on my door and insist that I change my decision. However, none of that took place. The house was deserted when I woke up and entered the kitchen. No parents, no Emma, and no Jake. I even wondered, wishful thinking I suppose, if they packed up and departed in the middle of the night. I waited for someone to say something, anything at all, while I sat at the table and made my coffee. I had no desire to engage in small talk or repeat my explanation. I wasn't going to back down now that I had drawn my line. I couldn't continue living that way. They had pushed me too far. They showed me no respect, and they certainly showed no respect for the fact that I was footing the bill. My mother eventually entered the kitchen. She appeared to have had little sleep. She simply got a cup of coffee and sat across from me without saying anything at first. It was strange that neither of us knew how to respond to the awkward silence. The stillness was finally broken by her. She spoke softly and wearily. "Honey, I know things have gotten out of hand." I just stared at my coffee and waited for her to continue without saying anything. Even though I knew she would have to apologize in some way, I wasn't going to let her get away with it. She went on, her voice shaking slightly. "I didn't realize how bad things had gotten between you and your brother. I guess I didn't see how unfair it was to you. We were just trying to help them." I was surprised by that, at least, not this quickly. I didn't think she would confess. I briefly believed that perhaps she was finally realizing that I wasn't the bad guy in this scenario. However, I was still unable to get over my irritation with all that had transpired. With a stronger tone than I meant, I responded. "You didn't just ignore what I wanted. You always took his side as if you thought I would give in and let them have whatever they wanted." She stared down at her coffee for a few seconds before speaking. "I understand," she muttered. "However, we reasoned that you've always been the more resilient one. He has never had it easy, Jake." She always used that as an excuse. Jake required more help, he wasn't strong, and he had struggled more. Since I was the one with my life together, it seemed as though they didn't believe I had any boundaries. "You also believe that I've had it easy?" With my rage seething just below the surface, I asked. "This residence was purchased by me. The mortgage is paid by me. The groceries are paid for by me. Do you really believe that I can continue carrying you all indefinitely?" She nodded and groaned. "You're correct. We couldn't have asked for anything more from you. However, Jake, the baby is on the way." I interrupted her. "The baby is not the point of this. You guys haven't shown me any respect, and this is about that. She looked tired as she sighed once again. We believed we were acting appropriately, she ultimately stated. Emma and Jake don't have much. And who is to blame for that? I fired back. I didn't request that they move in, none of this was requested of me. You can't keep saving them by putting me in a bad position, they need to learn how to live their own lives. She seemed to finally comprehend, or at least attempt to, as she nodded. She said, We'll figure something out, in a softer tone. But don't push us away, please, not in this manner. I tried to relax and sat back. Since they were my parents, I didn't want to expel them. However, I also couldn't continue to live this way. They would have to leave if things didn't change. I said as quietly as possible. I don't want to push you out, however, things must change. I can't continue to be treated like I don't belong in my own home. She simply nodded silently without arguing. All right, she said. We'll find a solution. She then walked out of the kitchen, leaving me to think alone once more. At least it seemed like they were beginning to take me seriously, even though I wasn't sure if anything would actually change. When Jake eventually arrived later that afternoon, he appeared to have been holding his rage all day. He simply dropped down across from me in the living room, wearing the same angry look he had worn ever since I delivered him the eviction notice. Without saying hello or anything else, I also remained silent and focused solely on my phone. So this is how things will be at last? He spat, his voice dripping with resentment. Are you really going to expel us? I hardly raised my gaze. I gave you a day. I'm going to contact the police if you're still here tomorrow. Jake snorted and shook his head as if I were the villain. We are related. You don't treat your family like this. I reclined back in my chair and placed my phone down. Yes, family members also don't take advantage of one another. Do you really think you can just take over my house after weeks of freeloading without doing anything, Jake? I'm not your backup plan. After that, he didn't say much for a minute. He sat there, obviously wanting to dispute, but he ran out of things to say. He understood I wasn't bluffing because I had outlined my criteria. Jake stood up, mumbling to himself, and went off again. After a few more uncomfortable moments of stillness, Jake was typical, always fleeing when he didn't get his way. Almost too peacefully, the remainder of the day went by. Even though I had no idea what Jake and Emma would do, I wasn't going to change my mind. They had more than enough time to work things out, yet, all they had done was snoop me. Everything would be decided in the following 24 hours. Second update. I got up early once more on the morning of their eviction deadline. I was aware that today would either be the day Jake and Emma moved out or compelled me to file a lawsuit. Oddly enough, I no longer felt angry. I didn't even feel nervous. The only thing left to do was to follow through on what I had already recognized had to happen. The home was still eerily quiet when I woke up and went into the kitchen, almost like the quiet before a storm. It felt different. Even though the refrigerator was still very empty from Jake and Emma's most recent grocery run, I prepared myself some breakfast. I was able to pull together enough money for a good supper, and as I ate, I couldn't help but reflect on how quickly things had gotten out of hand. It was all right only a few months ago. I was doing well with my parents, life was wonderful, I was working, and I was paying my expenses. Everything went haywire when Jake and Emma arrived. When individuals begin to feel entitled to things they didn't earn, it's amazing how quickly things can shift. I heard footsteps in the corridor a few hours later. After entering the kitchen and getting a cup of coffee, my dad took a seat at the table across from me. At first, he sipped his coffee and gazed out the window without saying anything. I couldn't tell whether he was upset with me or simply unsure of how to respond. The silence was finally broken by him. He muttered, "Jake and Emma are leaving today." I took a while to reply. Although I felt awful about it, I knew that this was the proper thing to do. I couldn't continue to allow them to exploit me, and if it meant they had to go, then so be it. With a quiet voice, my dad remarked, "They have nowhere to go. Until they work things out, They will be staying at a hotel for a while. Mid-bite, I paused and turned to face him. I did experience some guilt, but I pushed it away right immediately. They hadn't done anything to help themselves, even though I had given them plenty of time to get their act together. I said in a firm voice. I gave them a chance. They gave me no other option. My father did not quarrel. He simply nodded and took another sip of his coffee without attempting to guilt-trip me as I had assumed he would. Walked out of the room. I believed he eventually realized that this time, I wasn't going to back down. We couldn't return to the way things were after everything that had transpired. Jake and Emma began packing their belongings at lunchtime. I spent the majority of it in my room because I didn't want to argue with anyone else or hear more passive-aggressive remarks. However, I knew something was going to happen when I heard Jake's voice growing louder from down the corridor. After a time, Jake did really knock on my door. He was standing there with the same irate expression he had had since the beginning of this whole situation when I opened it. Are you really going to allow this to occur? His voice was stern as he inquired. You're simply going to dismiss us in this manner? I leaned against the door frame with my arms crossed. I gave you a day. You were aware of what had to occur. Jake clenched his jaw, obviously attempting to control his rage. Dude, we're family. You don't treat your family like this. I inhaled deeply while attempting to maintain my composure. Families do not exploit one another. I won't throw you out without cause. For weeks, you have been wasting your time here without making any contributions. I've been covering everything, including the groceries and the mortgage, and you attempted to evict me from my own home and seize my room instead of showing gratitude. I will not allow that to occur. For a few seconds, Jake remained silent. He was obviously furious, but he had nothing more to dispute about. Even though he didn't want to acknowledge it, he knew I was correct. That's it then. At last he muttered in a quiet voice. You're simply dismissing us? I answered. I'm giving you the same option I gave you yesterday. You have two options, either move somewhere else or respect my personal space by remaining in the guest room. However, you're going to leave if you're unable to accomplish it. Jake gave me one last look, then turned and left without saying anything else. I took a deep breath and shut the door. Although I knew it had to be done, the entire scenario had been draining. Jake and Emma had left by mid-afternoon. Sincerely, I didn't want to watch them go, so I didn't. A dramatic farewell was unnecessary. Without a word to me, they packed up their belongings, put them in their car, and drove away. After they left, the house was calmer and less tense. For the remainder of the day, I didn't hear much from my parents. They were probably still assimilating everything that had transpired. Despite her outward signs of distress, my mother remained silent. Perhaps she now understood that Jake and Emma had pushed me too far, and this was the outcome, and that I wasn't the cause of it all. My mother knocked on my door that night. She entered, took a seat on my bed's edge, and gazed at the floor for a long time. She was clearly struggling to find the proper words. She whispered, "They're gone." Without a word, I nodded. She said, "I never thought it would get to this point. I was unaware of the amount of pressure we were placing on you." I felt some of the frustration subside as I gazed at her. I tried to defend my position by saying, "It's not that I didn't want to help. However, you guys treated me as if my needs and personal space weren't significant." She nodded and groaned. "You're correct. We ought to have noticed it sooner." For several minutes, neither of us really knew what to say next, so we sat in silence. Although I could tell she was upset, at least she now appeared to get my point. After a while, I broke the stillness and said, "I don't want you and Dad to leave, but I can't continue living this way if things don't change." She stood up slowly and nodded once more. "We'll work it out," she said. "I promise things will be different." I experienced an odd mixture of relief and fatigue as she walked out of the room. There was still work to be done with my parents, but the matter with Jake and Emma was finally resolved. Even though I knew it wouldn't be simple, at least they seemed open to listening now. I felt as though I could breathe for the first time in weeks. The strain that had been choking me was gone, and the house was silent. Although it wasn't a flawless solution, I was at least able to regain my privacy and, more significantly, my respect. The house fell into a spooky silence when Jake and Emma left. Although I felt as though I could breathe at last, the incident continued to nag at the back of my mind. Even though I had won the fight for my room and my respect, I still questioned whether or not my relationship with my parents would ever truly return to normal. There was no turning back after I had drawn a firm line. Nevertheless, I thought that we could manage to proceed without all of the stress. The following days were peaceful, almost too quiet. My parents were largely private. Occasionally, my mother would say something courteous, but we never discussed the incident. My dad, who has always been the more reticent one, seemed to completely avoid any confrontational situations. I wasn't sure if they were still processing everything that had happened or if this was their way of giving me space. In any case, I was fine with the silence. In order to avoid thinking about anything, I threw myself into my work in my home office for the majority of the day. Now, the office served as both my haven and my escape from the turmoil of the previous several weeks. However, I would occasionally catch myself reflecting on how things had transpired. Even though I knew I had made the correct decision, I couldn't help but feel a little awful about how everything had gone so wrong. Something had to give because I had been taken advantage of for far too long. A week or so following Jake and Emma's departure, my mother entered my office as I was working. She seemed to be thinking about something, judging by the way she hovered at the entrance. "Are you free for a moment?" Her voice was strangely gentle as she inquired. I turned to her and nodded, saving my work. "What's going on?" She nervously wrung her hands as she entered the room. "Everything has been on my mind, including Jake, Emma, and our treatment of you." I remained silent so she could talk. She seemed to have something she wanted to talk about. Her voice cracked slightly as she said, "I just wanted to say that we didn't mean to make you feel like you didn't matter. We believed that we were assisting Jake, but now I realize that we were overburdening you. We took advantage of the fact that you have done more for us than we could have ever dreamed of. I apologize." I was taken by surprise by the apology. Although I had anticipated some sort of recognition soon, it was more painful for me to hear her express it so bluntly. Her honesty was evident in her eyes, and for the first time in a long time, I had the impression that she truly understood. Genuinely, she knew how I was feeling. I tried to speak steadily as I said, "Thank you, Mom." However, it was more than simply the house or the money. Respect was an issue. I had the impression that none of you respected me or the work I was doing to keep things going. Although I didn't mind assisting, I couldn't continue to live like this. She wiped a tear from the corner of her eye and nodded. "You're correct. We ought to have honored your personal space. It won't occur once more." Long emotional chats weren't my thing, but this one felt essential. I felt as though a burden had been removed, and I could now envision a way forward free from ongoing conflict and animosity. I got a little regretful grin from my mom, and she went back to the kitchen. For several minutes, I sat there, taking in what had been spoken. Although it was not a complete resolution, it was a positive step. A few weeks later was the actual turning moment. By that time, a new routine had been established in the house. The unpleasant atmosphere that had pervaded every room since Jake and Emma's departure had gradually subsided, and my parents were more considerate of my personal space. After living in a battle zone for the past few months, I could finally feel the house turning back into a home. My dad was seated at the kitchen table one evening, looking especially serious when I got home after an office meeting. Typically, my dad preferred to leave most of the hard talking to my mom. However, I could tell he had something significant to say by the way he was sitting and looking into his coffee cup. Trying to keep things informal, I said, "Hey," and got a drink out of the refrigerator. "Is everything all right?" His countenance was contemplative as he looked up. "I've wanted to speak with you." Curious but not really concerned with what he had to say, I took a seat across from him. Leaning forward with his hands clasped in front of him, he inhaled deeply. About the house and all of your efforts to maintain this place. I remained silent since I could tell he needed to vent. His voice was low as he started. I realize I haven't said much, however, I've given it a lot of thought. I want you to know how much I appreciate all that you have done for this family, more than any of us could have ever imagined. I was surprised. Hearing my dad speak those words felt important because he wasn't the kind to open up like this. He went on. You've carried more than your fair share, and you didn't ask for any of this. I apologize for the way things ended between Jake and Emma, and I just wanted to let you know that I see it. It struck me differently when he acknowledged everything I had gone through than when my mother apologized, because I could see he had been holding on to this for some time. Although either meant more than the other, my dad's reserved demeanor somehow gave his remarks a deeper meaning. I said, Thanks, Dad, since I was at a loss for words. That is very significant. He took another sip of his coffee and nodded. All I want is for things to improve for everyone. Although the chat was brief, it was sufficient. He seemed sincere, and I had the impression that things were at last beginning to improve at that precise moment. Over the next few weeks, things kept getting better. I no longer felt like I was bearing the burden of the home by myself. Once my parents and I established a new routine, they began to assist more, cleaning, helping with groceries, and generally showing me respect for my personal space. Although it wasn't flawless, it was a significant improvement. Step up from our previous situation. After they departed, I didn't hear much from Jake and Emma. According to my mom, they were looking for a place of their own and were spending some time in a motel. I refrained from crying. Even though I adored my brother, I needed him to learn how to be independent, so I had set clear limits. I'd be happy to stay away for a while if that meant it. About a month after the entire incident, Jake texted me one afternoon. It was succinct and direct, not his typical tone, but it sounded genuine. Hey, I understand that things went wrong. I simply wanted to apologize for the way things turned out. I hope we can speak soon as we work things out. I looked at the message for a long time, unsure of how to react. A part of me was grateful for the gesture, but another part of me was still upset about how everything had turned out. I took a while to respond. It took me longer to process. I took some time that evening to write a response, attempting to be polite yet explicit about my position. I appreciate the message. I'm happy that you two are working things out. I need some time, but I hope we can communicate soon as well. When both of us are ready, let's catch up. A weird sensation of closure came over me as I pushed send. Even though I didn't expect things to be flawless, at least we could communicate once more. A few weeks ago, that was more than I could have imagined. I started to feel more at ease with everything as time passed. My parents were finally accepting my boundaries, and there was no longer any tension in the house. Above all, I regained my sense of control over my life and my personal space. The journey here was not simple. One of the most difficult things I had ever had to do was to stand up for myself, especially when it meant going against my family. However, it was ultimately worthwhile. I had gained an important lesson. Even in your own family, respect is something you have to earn, it is not something you can demand. I had earned mine too. In retrospect, I'm happy I didn't give up. It would have been simple to give in and let Jake and Emma take over my room, to allow my parents to continue to manage the house as if I were a visitor. I didn't want that life though. I longed for my own personal space and dignity, and suddenly I had both. Perhaps Jake and Emma's situation will change in the future. Perhaps we'll be as close as we were before all of this drama. However, for the time being, I'm only concerned with living my life as I need to, and for the first time in a long time, that feels sufficient. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.